Welcome and thanks for coming. I'm grateful for the chance to talk to everyone, and I'm grateful for this particular audience because I don't normally get to talk to people who are very interested in analytics. So interesting audience for me. I'm going to start by introducing myself, but first, actually, I'll allow Emily Ravenwood from the University of Michigan to introduce herself.
Certainly. Hi, my name is Emily Ravenwood. I have been working with Harmonize for, the past year, just about, bringing that tool to the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts at the University of Michigan. And it's been an excellent partnership so far. So now today we're going to get to talk about one of the specific new features that we've been piloting with some of my faculty.
Great. So my name's Clint Popetz. I'm the CTO and the analytics lead for Harmonize, which is a product by 42 Lines. My background is pretty analytic. My training, my degrees are in physics and mathematics, but most of my life I've spent programming computers for a living, except for a brief time as a radio journalist. But I promise not to get extremely Ira Glass in the way that I speak. Um, so the 42 Lines is the mission is to elevate the online learning experience. I'll let you read it. I won't read it for you. We've been building online learning software for about 15 years. 11 of it, Marcus and I have spent together building it specifically at 42 Lines. Early on, I was an online learning skeptic, but years of experience with asynchronous forums and working with instructors and interacting with the types of students that thrive and that might not thrive in successfully in a traditional setting led me to believe that online learning is possibly excellent and possibly not just a substitute for a classroom in traditional settings, but maybe goes beyond it. But we need great teachers using great tools, and so I have to build the great tools. So that's what we do. I'm not going to do a full demo of Harmonize because that's not my role. I'm a software engineer. When I look at software, I see everything that's wrong with it. So, in brief, I'll give you a breakdown of what it is. It's a discussion forum hosted within any LTI compliant LMS. It goes beyond traditional forums in terms of its ease of use, the fluency of expression, the types of interaction that are possible. It adopts user interface paradigms from social media platforms. It provides a more intuitive space for asynchronous learning and engagement. It's multimedia rich. It's responsive, ADA compliant. It has a number of features. I can't possibly list all the features. It has a private multi-person chat. It has video recording in the browser and a QA forum. It has mechanisms for student facilitatorship, multimedia image and video markup, and soon PDF markup. Has lots of features. If you'd like to learn more about it, there are people in this chat that can tell you, and there's a website, and you can get demos. Um, we try to play well with others, and it takes many types of people to support learning in higher ed, and we recognize the value of each of the roles that are listed here, and we try to ensure that we provide value to them, whether it's through reporting or security, integrations, accessibility, training and support. We want the entire ecosystem that supports online learning to be happy with us and with the tool. These are some of the people and some of the relationships we have. We're very much proponents of standards and openness and collaboration. Our entire software product is built on a lot of open source software, built to a lot of standards. So we're LTI 1.3, LTI Advantage, and IMS Trusted Ed Certified. We're contributing members of the IMS Global Consortium. We take accessibility very seriously. We do WCAG 2.1 AA guide specification compliant, but we also go beyond that with each of the features that we build in an attempt to really build accessible software. The other thing I'll mention is that we don't think of our data as ours. It's certainly yours. All it belongs to the instructors and the universities. We emit harmonized activity data into Caliper using the event forum model, the forum event model. A lot of the data you're going to see today can't effectively be translated into Caliper because the forum model does not have enough specificity to the things that we're doing. But we are contributing members and we sit on committees, and we're looking forward to working over the coming years with partners in the LMS space to try to figure out how we can move that forward so that this data can eventually make its way into Caliper and thus be able to be used by the tools such as those that Unizin provide. So enough about us. We've been analyzing student interaction data in the LMS for many years. We approached the University of Michigan, one of the institutions using Harmonize, to see if they'd be willing to work with us on initial steps towards making this analysis available to instructors within the tool. And they graciously accepted. And Emily Ravenswood, along with the instructors at the university, have devoted a lot of time with us over the semester toward that end. So we're very, very grateful for that. The goals of the analytics project. It's initially a problem-based approach, meaning that we're building a predictive model that are trying to find students who are interacting less or either less than their peers or less than they previously interacted and helping nudge them towards greater interaction. We only have the data that's inside the forum in Harmonize, so this is very specific to their performance in the forums in Harmonize. Nudging isn't all that we'll eventually do with this tool, but this is the first step, and I think it provides a good amount of value, particularly to busy instructors who may not have a depth of experience with analytics, but are interested in knowing what's happening in their classroom and interested in helping. The same visualizations that we use here could be used for exploration and were used by the instructors in this pilot for exploration across a variety of topics, including what are the overall student responses to the different topics and the different approaches I used in the class. But our initial goal is to focus on catching students who are fading away. So one important feature that we're going to be looking at, I'm not Italian, but I do talk with my hands, and I apologize. So if you're looking at me on the side, you're seeing that a lot. I don't know if it's a Polish thing, but it's inside me. One important feature of Harmonize is multiple due dates, and I'll also call them requirements or milestones. We have many names for them internally. It's simply a way of making explicit a set of expectations for a student over the course of a topic. For example, you may want the student to post within a certain number of days of a topic opening. You may then make them want to subsequently make a number of comments on other people's posts for a few days. And after that, you might want them to make a reply to someone's comment before the end of the topic. The idea is to spread out the expected activity in a topic in the hopes of increasing student interaction in the tenure of the topic, whether it's the quantity of interactions they have, the number of peers they interact with, the depth of those interactions, and the amount of time over which they interact. We want that to be greater and richer. And we wanted to dig into the data surrounding this feature and find out, were we successful? So we dug deeper, and the data is pretty messy, and this is a difficult graph, but we're going to do our best. This graph is a heat map that's representing two things. It's representing on the x-axis how long did it take the students to meet the first deadline, and the measurement is 1 would be they met that deadline exactly at the first deadline. Half would mean they met it halfway to the first deadline. 1.5 means they met it halfway between the first deadline and the second deadline, and 2 would mean they met it at the second deadline. And beyond that, there's very little activity, but it would mean they met it after everything had passed. And the same thing for the y-axis is the normed time of meeting the final or second deadline in this case. And what we see, the bright spots are where there are more students posting and meeting the deadline at that time. And what we see is that students, as expected, form cohorts. They form types of students. And we see that these types of students tend to actually be pretty consistent for a given student. They tend to operate the same way, given the same requirement structure over the course of their course. And this helps us build a predictive model so that we don't treat the students all as one type of student, but rather understand this person is always meeting both the requirements right away. They're doing it right at the beginning of the class, whereas this student always meets them just before the deadline. So if they still haven't met it and the deadline is in an hour, don't worry because they always do. But what's interesting about this graph is that the lightness is spread out between that central point and that top red point, which the central point and the top red point are definitely where you would expect students to fall. The top red point is everyone is meeting the second deadline and the first deadline exactly when they're specified. But the yellow that stretches between those and surrounds those are people who are meeting the second deadline earlier than that. And that's an interesting finding because most people consider requirements to be a tautology, meaning I asked for X and I got X, and I asked for a post by this date and a comment by this date, and that's what I would get. But instead, what we find out is that, so in these graphs, the top are read actions, meaning I was reading other people's posts and comment, and the bottom are content actions. I was reacting, I was posting, I was commenting, replying. And what we see is 1 is exactly at the first deadline and 2 is exactly at the second deadline, but we see an interesting amount of reading and commenting and interacting that is smeared between those two places. And we don't see that when we look at graphs for the most part of classes that don't have requirements. Absent a lot of instructor guidelines to sort of focus and engage the students on a continual basis, most will either post at the very beginning when a topic opens, or they will post right when the topic is due, but there's typically very little activity in between. And so this was interesting because it shows that we were able to spread out the interactions with milestones. This is another way of looking at that same thing, which is to measure the per student engagement length. How long, how many days did students engage with the topic? So this is a histogram, and then each of the grant bins is a number of days spent engaging with a topic. And we see that in the 2 deadline case, there are more students engaging later with the topic. And what's interesting also in this case is that drop off you see around 5 is the second milestone. However, we do see, even beyond the second milestone, more engagement happening, and we don't see that typically in classes without milestones. So we're extending the time that people are interacting with the tool. This is a final graph about requirements, and it's complicated, but I think it's exciting and worth looking at. The x-axis is topics that have a given number of comments required. So the first column is 1, the second column is 2 comments required, and the y-axis is the percentage of students that make a given number of comments in that kind of topic. So the brightness represents higher number of students, higher percentage of students, and the numbers reflect that as well. And the bright yellow line is exactly what you would expect. It's people meeting exactly the number of requirements that is expected of them in terms of the number of comments they make in a topic. However, what we see is that when 3 or more comments are required, we have above the line people who are making more comments than is expected of them. So for example, with 3, we have, and I didn't add them beforehand, but it looks like 28%. 28% of the class made more comments than were expected. Similarly, if you look at the 5th column, we have 29% of the class made more comments than the 5 that were expected of them, which is interesting for 2 reasons. 1, it didn't have to happen at all. And 2, it didn't happen for the case of 1 requirement, but it also didn't happen in the case of 2 comments. And 2 comments I learned this actually from Emily, is that very common in the literature. 2 comments is the recommendation of what people have for is a sort of a low bar for people to meet in terms of interaction in a course. And what we see is that it didn't have that effect for 2, but it certainly did with 3. This is across all courses that used requirements at the University of Michigan during this semester. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Emily for some comments. You're still muted, Emily.
Thank you. We should all just have signs that say that we can hold up this entire year. So one of the things that I do want to highlight here is that we frequently think of data as being useful either to the administrators or to the instructors who are interacting directly with students. But there's another group that this kind of data is very useful to, and that's the instructional designers. This is the sort of data and graphing and visualization that instructional designers can look at and say, oh, okay, we can use this to shape our recommendations and best practices. And as Clint said, one of the oldest standbys that a lot of people in online learning are used to seeing is post once, comment twice. This is just give people this guideline and you'll at least get something out of them. But this data suggests that actually we get a lot better results in terms of student engagement if we flex that, if we say, okay, we want more interactions, we want more, again, milestones, deadlines, points of prompting the students, and that will result in better engagement, better discussions, at least on some level. And so this is the kind of thing that an instructional designer, or in my case, at least a manager of instructional designers these days, really, really wants to know. This is also the kind of data that makes it easier for a designer to look and see, if they have access to it, whether a new teaching strategy or new assignment is working. And I'm sure that those of you who are IDs know the challenge of closing that loop to get feedback from the instructors about how something works in practice. And this is one tool that offers us at least one way to close that loop for the designers to say, oh, okay, this worked or this didn't. Let's look at that. Let's either recommend that more or maybe go back and see what we can change. So this kind of data, the overarching multiple classes data, that's something that I think will be very useful to the IDs. And then, of course, we have the instructors. So Clint, back over to you to talk about that.
Great, thank you. So this is the pilot with the University of Michigan that we engaged with, and I want to talk a bit about the goals. We iterated each week with the instructors and we gave them visualizations. And then we tried to respond to their feedback and improve them each week. And each week the visualizations were new and had more data and more features within them. We were trying to understand how they made sense of it. There were questions we had: are they too complex? Are you able to act upon them? And then we also had the question of, here's the same data, two visualizations, just tell us which one is more intuitive and which one's more useful to you. So really we were just trying to learn from them about what they found in the data that we represented to them. I feel like I should, before this slide, there should be a slide that says not all instructors like requirements, and it probably should be in all caps because a lot of instructors don't like requirements. It's controversial. Some people find them to be a tautology or too restrictive, and we acknowledge that we're not trying to build one learning tool that fits everyone. We're trying to build a flexible learning tool that can be adapted so that whatever your teaching style, it will work. So we picked two teachers with very different approaches. They're both excellent teachers, but one very much uses the milestone feature in their class and has a larger class. And the other, Professor Sabine, has two classes, but there are no due dates, no milestones, and generally smaller classes. And we were interested, how can we provide visualizations to these people that will be useful to both of them and isn't relying on just a visualization on requirements and data around requirements. So in terms of the type of data that this model and these visualizations are based on, there are over 250 things we're gathering, but they fall into these categories. The first is content. We're looking at the complexity of posts, their length and comments, the length of them. Word count is the simplest, but things like readability scores, grade level scores, all the way through to NLP analysis of sentiment analysis, keyword matching, trying to understand, are they meshing with the overall theme of the topic? The second category is timing. How soon after the topic opens are they posting? How often? The time between interactions. How near to the deadline are they posting? The quantity of posts is just a measure of how often are they there, but it's not just post, it's posts and comment. How often are they logging in and reading and returning to previous posts? So quantity of interaction, of engagement. Requirements is for those courses that use multiple milestones, are the students meeting those requirements? Are they posting in time, commenting in time? And then there's connectedness, which is much harder to get at, but maybe one of the most interesting of all. How many interactions are they having with other students? What is the depth of that interaction? Are we seeing conversations that evolve? And with how many different students is each student interacting in a topic and across a course? So here's the first of a figure that we gave to them. You can see those 5 things that I mentioned as columns, but on the left, there's also a composite one that attempts to reflect the overall score across these different metrics. Each week, the instructors received 4 figures, and this is the first they received. Each dot is a student, of course. There's no absolute numbering. They're just being ranked relative to their peers on these metrics. And This is shown both across the course and across an individual topic. So you can click on a student, excuse me, I'm recovering still from an illness, so I apologize for my voice. You can click on a student and see immediately where they are with respect to their relationship to their peers. And the other thing that you can do is you can move through time across the topics, either by selecting a topic from a dropdown of them, or by just moving a slider with regard to time, showing the nth topic in the course. And you can see over time how that chosen student changes with respect to their peers, but you can also see how the distribution changes with respect to peers. For example, if a student drops way down on timing in a given topic. However, in that topic, everyone is all over the place. There's a wide dispersion. Then that wasn't something you saw previously. Then you can gather that okay, everyone was kind of off their game that topic, or maybe it was a holiday, or maybe something was going on in the world, global pandemic. I don't know, but the idea is that you get the context of the course. You can also hover over any of these dots to see student names, and you can also click on them to go to their profile in the LMS. That's obviously not here for privacy concerns. This is the second, and this is narrowing in on a very specific student, one student at a time. There would be a drop down where you could choose the student. And this is showing those different metrics, and it's showing them all over at once, with the idea that you can see correlations between them or overall trends in the student performance. It's a pretty busy graph, and so you can click on any of the things in the legend in order to hide and show the different ones in order to focus in on certain things. Each of these dots is a topic with the oldest topics on the left, newest topics on the right. Hovering over a topic will show you that topic subject so that you get a sense for what was happening in the class. This is the kind of thing that once embedded into a dashboard in Harmonize, it would have surrounding context. For example, clicking on a topic might show you additional statistics about that topic below so that you had further information to go on. This is that same data, but it's split out into separate plots. We wanted to know which of these was the most useful to the instructors for representing that same underlying trace data, and the response we got was they're both useful, which from a software engineering perspective was sad because fitting both of them into a user interface design will be difficult, but they are both useful, and they're useful in different ways. This one is more useful for understanding very specifically a trend. The other one is pretty noisy. This one you can zero in and go, are they later and later and later or when they're posting? Are they meeting requirements mostly except for a few times? How connected are they to their peers, and is it changing over time? Whereas the other one was more useful for just getting an overall sense of this was a good week, this was a bad week across different metrics. And I'm going back to you, Emily.
All right. So as you may imagine, this being directed towards instructors, we're going to talk about the benefits of this particular approach for instructors. And one of the biggest ones that I saw out of this and that my faculty confirmed is that this is a way to validate instructors' gut feelings. Instructors often know pretty well how students are doing, but they often doubt their own instincts without hard data to back it up, and so may hesitate to act on their instincts for how are my students doing? Is this student in trouble? This is one way to encourage instructors to reach out sooner to students who are silent or are showing as disconnected on the graph, or maybe having some kind of difficulty with these discussions. This also is one way to provide formative feedback to the instructor about the Harmonize assignments without it having to be an extra assignment to the students. And that's kind of a benefit both to the instructor and the students. There are certainly benefits to having specific feedback assignments, but too many of those can sometimes make students feel overloaded or nagged. Sometimes you'll even see feedback on the forums about, well, isn't this the instructor's job and not ours to fix the class? So this is one way of having solid data-based formative feedback that is also almost invisible to the students. It's just bundled as part of how are they doing on these assignments. So from my point of view, this was a very successful pilot in that it really did make it easier for the instructors to do their part of the class. And in fact, the next section will talk a little bit about how that worked. So Clint, back to you.
Thanks. So pretty graphs. This is the fourth type of visualization that we showed the instructor was a network graph of the connectivity of interactions in a course. And these can be really complex, and sometimes they can be difficult to read. The yellow is these are examples of different types of courses that we see emerge in these patterns. The yellow is an instructor. The blue is a student. The size is the number of comments, the size of the node. And the lines between them are comments exist. That means that there's a connection between those two peers in the course in terms of comments they made on each other's posts or on each other's comments as replies. And the thickness of the lines represents how many interactions were they having. So we sort these based on the more interactive you are, the more people you are interacting with, and the stronger those interactions, the more you tend to move towards the center, and the less connected you are to the overall graph, the more you move to the outside. And so you can see that there are many types of courses. These are some samples I picked out of various courses at UMich, but they're teacher-centric courses that are very much a student answering and responding to students and no students interacting. There are ones that are totally balanced, and there's everything in between. So it's fascinating to look at these. We showed one each week to instructors, and that's this one. So it's the same as before, except we've added the color as a dimension, and the color represents how early in a course did that student post in a given topic. So if we're looking at a course overall, it's an average of how early they were posting with regard to their peers over the course of the semester. But if we're looking at a specific topic, it's how early did they post. So again, large size of the node is comments, and connections are comments upon each other. And centrality just reflects how central you are to the discussion. And there are a lot of metrics for network centrality, and if there's anyone who wants to talk about them, I'm happy to, but it's a deep topic. So what you can do is you can click in these graphs, the instructors could click on a given node and see who is someone connected to. And they could hover over each of these dots and be seen who is that person that they're connected to. And you could click on any of the dots and be taken to the profile. Eventually, clicking on these edges inside the LMS, inside Harmonize, would take you perhaps to that interaction. What was the common thread that happened between them? Here's an example of in the same at UMich, different course. The gray dot is the instructor, and we see that in this course, the instructor is very central to interaction, much thicker lines, meaning much more back and forth commenting between the student and the instructor. Everyone is, in this case, is posting very early. We know that instructor interaction can be very crucial, and we can change the color of these to reflect that. So one of the interesting things is we can make the node color reflect how many comments did you receive from the instructor, or more than one instructor in this case. There are two in this graph. How many comments did you receive from instructors in your course? And then we sort in the same way. And what we see is that people who are commented on more by instructors tend to be pulled deeper into interaction with their peers, and comments that people who are commented on less by their instructors tend to be on the periphery. They tend to not have as many interactions with their peers. This is obviously one course, but we are seeing this across courses when we do the analysis. So there's a correlation between instructor comments and overall connectedness. We do not know in which way it's causative, but it's an interesting thing to note. But one of the things that one of the instructors suggested to us, which we think is a very valuable addition, is that if you could click on one of these exterior dots on whom you haven't commented and who hasn't received many comments from others, and immediately be taken to their most recent post in a topic to make a comment, you could, but just very quickly and very easily, identify those in need of pulling back into the discussion, and maybe by virtue of the influence you have as an instructor, lead them to be more involved in the discussion. So there are some other stories we can tell with these that are interesting. So in this top left one, we have a map for a student, and we can see that they have very good content scores. They're posting either more complex content or longer content, or content that's more on target than their peers consistently. However, the light blue line shows that they're posting it late. compared to their peers very often. And we also see, and it's harder to see because it's grayed out, but the connectedness line is also very low. So we can see that no matter how good your content, if you're not there early on, you may not get comment upon and you may not get interaction. One of the things we're considering, and we've been discussing this with the instructors at UMich, is enabling having the instructors be able to enable a default sort that puts lower interacting students' posts and comments higher when they log in to their peers, so that when I come in, the first thing I see is not necessarily the first thing that posted, but rather someone who just hasn't gotten a lot of attention either in that topic or over the course of the course, as a way of balancing these things out. The second graph is interesting because it shows that same type of student, a different student, but same type of student, and there is one course where they posted earlier, the blue dot went up above similar to peers, and indeed they received more interaction. And so it isn't just that necessarily that there are people who just never receive comments, but rather that there is a trend that the structure of the course structure of asynchronous learning tends to, by default, promote interaction with people who are posting earlier, and that's something to address. Two more stories, and these are more problematic stories. These are people who aren't doing as well. So the top is someone who dropped out of the course. And what we can see is that even though early on their content scores, the red line, were either above or their peers or at least even with their peers for the most part, they're and that's true also of their timeliness as well and the meeting of requirements. However, they had almost no interaction. They were from a very early on receiving almost no comments and giving almost no comments to their peers. And we see that in fact, over time, the rest of their metrics drop off after that one has dropped off, and then they drop out of the class. This is an example of where we feel like nudging might help. And in fact, this is an example of one of the things that Emily mentioned was we mentioned, so one thing I should say is that these graphs weren't provided from the very beginning of the course. This is an artifact of getting up to speed and jumping in with instructors and getting them data and going through all the things you need to do to make sure that's done well. We didn't get there for the first 3 or 4 topics. So we were basically in the last half of the semester. And one of the instructor for this student said, this is my gut feel that I had about them early on, and I didn't reach out. And looking at this graph, if I had seen this graph early, I would have, because I had a feeling that they were fading away and that they weren't interacting very much, but I wasn't sure. And this graph shows what my gut feel was. So it's a way of reinforcing and giving confidence to the things that the instructors kind of already know in their classes. Um, the second one is interesting because the student is doing very well overall across a range of metrics, and staying and meeting requirements and staying present, and then they have a big downward slope, and then they miss a topic entirely, and then they make a steady climb back upwards, but to a below median level. And one of the things is that this is a very easy student for our analytic engine to notice. And in that 8th topic where they really went downhill across from their previous topic and the trend was very negative, we could very easily pop up to the instructor a nudging interface that says, here's what we're seeing, here's what we're worried about, and give them the opportunity to reach out to the student either just before or at the beginning or during that 9th topic, which could have possibly prevented that student from being absent during that topic. So here we tried to get some quotes from the 2 instructors. We had many meetings with them actually, and they were all very useful. We talked to them in the beginning, setting up the framework for this over the course of it and at the end. And these are a couple quotes that we got from them at the end as part of the meeting we had going over the results. Sabine shared how this has helped her understand her class and measure activity as a whole, but also at the individual level. She was very engaged with us in terms of interrogating the data, and more so than I imagined a busy teacher could be, and it was very rewarding to talk to her. The second is Professor Bruno, and they remarked that they helped reinforce his gut feelings, as Emily said, and alerted him to opportunities to intervene and reach out. And he wished he had had them earlier, and he's excited about having them in future semesters. So it was a lot of positive feedback. Okay, go ahead, Emily.
All right. So We've talked about the benefits that this data can have to instructional designers and obviously to instructors, especially as more of the features are developed. I want to kind of launch our very last segment by mentioning the benefits for admins and adoption managers, the people who deal with licensing tools, because this kind of data, first of all, makes it easier just to see if the tool is being used, right? There's no need to go and nag the vendor requesting special reports. The data is already available. This is also a way to get student data in addition to instructor feedback. Often people on the admin side of things only hear the good or bad things about a tool or a service from the instructors based on their gut feelings. And while, as we've said, those feelings are often accurate, they aren't always. So being able to have any kind of visibility into the usage of the tool, into how successful it is, that is extremely valuable for the people who have to think about, are we going to pay for this? Are we going to keep paying for this? Are we going to encourage or support this? And from my personal point of view, I have to say, this is a good lever. So many ed tech tools are still, even today, black boxes from the point of view of anyone except the vendor themselves. And this makes an excellent example of making data visible and actionable to help the admins push back against that tendency and to say to some other vendor, hey, Harmonize is giving me this really excellent data. Are you guys working on that? Yeah, you should be working on that. So, just from my point of view, there's a lot of utility in this and in developing this that goes beyond the classroom itself and into the whole support sphere. So the last little bit is going to address a little more of that kind of data. Clint, back to you.
Clint, I did have one question, and
Sure.
you might cover it in a bit. Patricia was asking about whether the instructors have to go dig or whether they get notifications. And I don't know if you're going to cover that more later or if you'd like
I
to cover it
wasn't,
now.
but I can talk about it really quickly. So there's already a certain amount of this already in Harmonize with regard to requirements, meeting requirements. Certainly, Harmonize has a dashboard where you can understand where students are with regard to posting and comments already in the feature. But the idea in this tool is that we would kind of get in your face. This is one of the ideas is that this should become a part of your a part of your weekly or biweekly experience of keeping track of where your students are. And so the intent here is for the analytic engine that I'm getting ready to describe to very explicitly bring forward this data and to surface it to you and make you aware of it. So that's actually where I'm going next. If I can make my machine work, there we go. A brief point on predictive analytics for the people who like it and interested and understand it. This is an ROC curve. What it reflects is how good our engine is or is not at trying to figure out when people are going downhill and need help. If we were doing absolutely as good or bad as a random sampling of data, then we would get just that diagonal line. That would mean we were meaningless. If we were absolutely perfect, the graph would go straight up from the bottom left and it would go straight over to the right, and it would be a step function, and I would make lots of money leaving Harmonize and going doing things for other analytics companies. But where we are is pretty good. So what we have is over 250 features. We've created a predictive model and it adapts to course size, feature adoption in Harmonize, for example. Are you using milestones? Are you using anonymity? Can people post anonymously? Are you grouping students using Canvas's groups? Are you appointing student facilitators inside the classroom? Are you grading your courses or are you not grading your courses? And then we also look at the ongoing student and instructor activity patterns in a topic and historically in the course. And then we try to predict if you're using grades, are you likely to have a bad grade for this student in the next topic? And if you aren't using grades, are we predicting a lower than threshold participation? And we're doing this data analysis across hundreds of courses from participating institutions. And so the model is getting better and better as we go. The idea behind it, and this is the last slide of where it's going for a release hopefully this fall, is that We're trying to empower instructors with this data. We're not trying to replace them. It's a tool that's going to live in the LMS for instructors to use and surface data that they can take action on. It's going to surface actionable insights, meaning it's not going to be something you have to go dig for. It won't be data that's buried in a dashboard. It will be data that pops up on a regular basis. We will let you determine the basis. You can say, please don't remind me until next week, or never remind me about that student again, or I'm worried about that student, but let's talk about it next week. But there should be a recurring interaction that happens when you log in and when we have someone that we're worried about that lets you know that there's something that needs to happen. And when we pop that up, the idea is that instructors who are very interested in data and really want to understand can dive as deep as they want into the data, and we'll provide increasing levels of richness in the data as you scroll down. But if you stay up at the top, we're going to provide a gut summary of why we're worried, a graph that attempts to capture that same idea, peer-related graphs, and we show those like we've shown previously, and then a clear path to take an action. So there will be things like, would you click here to send a chat message using Harmonize Chat, click here to send an email message, or click here to be taken to their most recent post and make a comment. We're also considering things like send a video message very easily if that's something people want. We're going to have to do a lot of UI analysis and UI research to figure out what's going to work. We're trying to be as transparent as we can. There's not any magic in this where we want to give clear expectations of what's being measured and how that data comes to mean what we think it means. There's no stale data and no batching. You don't have to worry about whether the data is last night's data and is out of date. We're trying to always use contextual representations. So contextual means several things. It means there are no absolute numbers. Everything is shown as with regard to the peers, the median of the peers. We're trying to adapt to different learning patterns, and so that we recognize that what is bad behavior for one student isn't poor behavior for another student. And we're embedding these within the online learning environment so that the place that you look at them is the same place that you go to see the student's work. So you have the richness of that surrounding data. We intend to make it customizable and annotatable so that you can adapt the tool to your use over time and learn from it over time and be able to go back and reflect on nudges that you made and what you saw in a given topic or in a course over time, even in previous courses, if you reteach the courses, so that you can understand what effect this is having in your courses. And as I mentioned, it needs to be routine. We need to surface these insights. There's a ton of data, and it doesn't work if the data is just always there, and there's always a lot of it, and it doesn't work if the data is never there. It has to be there just when you need it and just in time to make an intervention. And finally, we're trying to iterate and co-design this. So as you've seen, we've been working with instructors at UMich, and we've also worked with learning analytics professionals and professors who've studied this. We're trying to get a sense for what works, and we'll build the tool that meets the instructor's needs rather than building one and just hoping people use it. So those are our guiding principles, and now I've reached the end. Before we do Q&A, Emily, did you have any wrap up or things you would like to add to the overall conversation?
I think the only thing that I would want to add to that is that while obviously you don't always have instructors who are as invested as Sabine and as Bruno in really digging into the data, I think this is something that will be flexible enough that, you know, the instructors who say, just give me a summary, you know, a couple times a term or once a week, will also find it reasonably useful.
That is our hope. One thing I did want to mention that I think I was talking to Morgan about this at the happy hour, is that, you know, a lot of the student fading away stuff is reacting to bad grades, bad GPA, reacting to things that have already gone wrong. And the hope here is that if you make it easy enough for the instructors to detect that fade away, it's almost like a formative dropout detector, if you will, of can we save that student before they fade away, before they drop out of the class, because we saw them fading, we interacted, they became part of the community, and going from there. And that is I think the most exciting part about this to me is that if we can really get at this early warning system for a student, then maybe we can save some students from dropping out of classes.
Yeah, the way that we're building it also is that it is it does not ignore grades, but it does not need them in order to be effective. So in the courses that give grades, and the grades are intended to signify success, because participation grading, which is a feature we offer, would simply reflect back to us what we already knew. But if an instructor is giving grades on content, then we do incorporate that into the trends that we track. But if they don't, and a lot of them don't, we can treat interaction and engagement and the complexity of that interaction as a goal in its own right, and we can measure it and detect trends in it, and therefore we can say the best we can do in the forum is to let you know when people are interacting less in the forum, then we're going to do that. And in the hopes that if you believe that the interaction is meaningful and substantive, then you will find that useful.
So you have 5 minutes left, and put your questions in the chat if you have them. I have a half question, half statement from Dan Burgess at the University of Michigan as well that I think is interesting, and maybe you'd want to talk to because it highlights how hard this is. He said it's going to be interesting to see if there would be any impact on early posters if you start to feature later postings and those start to get more peer responses. And I thought this was interesting because it's just the influence that a simple thing like sort can have on this data. And whether we are measuring artifacts of the software or whether we're measuring, anyway, I don't know if you'd care to speak to that, but.
Yeah, I mean, as an Uber geek, it's fascinating to me, and as someone who builds software, it's fascinating to me. So I want to know how everything in the interface affects this. For example, in Harmonize, you can default to a view that shows you the poster cards that we saw earlier that have images on the front of them, and you can default to a view that just has the title of posts that are made, and we refer to those as grid view and list view. There's some possibility, and I have not dug into it yet, that those that have really flashy, interesting, beautiful photos on the flip side of their posts get more clicks. You have to click them to flip them over, and you have to click them to comment in that case. And so I'm curious to see if there's a relationship between those who bother to upload a photo for the cover of their post and those that don't. Do those that upload a photo to their post get more interaction from people who are looking at the post in grid view versus those that are looking at it in list view, for example? So yes, our intent is to learn from this, make changes, track the effect of those changes, and write blog posts and webinars about what we're seeing and share it back to the instructors and to the community at large.
And so someone just asked, how about the privacy and the creativity in the discussion process? Once students know their words are monitored, would that be a trigger to limit the way they respond to the questions?
Yes, and this is a big topic. So I mentioned transparency, and I had specifically not talked about student transparency. Each institution has differing ideas about this. One of our goals, for example, is to make it so that we can flip these, that these same visualizations could be shown, in particular the student trend visualizations could be shown to students in conference in order to check in with them about their progress. And one of the instructors mentioned that they very much would like to do that. But once you start to begin to talk to students of what you're monitoring, there is always the potential for gaming what's being monitored. And there's the potential for students to be worried that they're running through rats in the cages. There's a lot of good literature in the analytics community about balancing those needs. And so going forward, we're trying to walk that line where we are measuring things and being honest that we're measuring things without triggering a sense that, one, the measurement is all that matters, or two, leading to gaming of the measurements. And I will admit it's a difficult challenge, and we haven't fully solved it.
And if anyone has any more questions, we have 2 minutes left. Actually, I don't know if there's any wrap-up slides that you had or.
No, this is it. Oh, well, we're in QA. We invite you to share. There's a link in the chat, or there will be, yes, there it is from Heather, where you're going to be able to, interact with us and give us your feedback, criticism, comments, thoughts, and you're welcome also to engage with us on our website or set up a meeting with us if you're just interested in further conversation. And that's all I have. I have to thank Unizin for having us. This is a wonderful opportunity for us, for Emily and her instructors for all of the work that they did to make it possible to do this pilot. So thank you, everyone, and to everyone for coming and listening. I don't do these very often. I'm usually programming, so thank you.
All right, Brad, do you have any wrap-up duties? There you go.
Clint, Emily, yeah, I'll shut off the recording here in just a second, and then I have to shut down the link in order to clear the room for the next session So apologies if anyone says anything and gets abruptly cut off by me. But yeah, we've got about 30 seconds left if there's anything else that needs to be said. Otherwise, thank you all for attending.
I am
Thank you,
certain
everyone.
we cannot answer any
thank
question
you.
in 30 seconds. So,
That's
all
fair.
right, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone.